So today we welcome to Global Citizenship Interview Series, Annette Scheunpflug. Annette is a full professor, chair of Foundations in Education, University of Bamberg in Germany, member of board of Angel, academic network on global education and learning, and chair of the board of Global Education Network Europe, GENI. She's an elected member of the Academy of Sciences in Munich. Annette has delivered more than 500 public presentations, speeches, national and international keynotes, and her main areas of interest or research includes educational quality, anthropology in education, global citizenship, global learning, religion, and education. So Annette, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Global Citizenship Interview Series. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very honored to be with you. Thank you very much.
So all my guests here would go through a very, I would say, straightforward question. And the question is, what is global citizenship and what is global education in your opinion?
So for my understanding, this question has two different dimensions. First, it has the dimension of explanatory and definition form or scope. And if I go to if I start with this, first at the beginning of my career, I was understanding global learning as an educational response to the fact of the development of the world. And this is a definition which is following Siegfried Bernfeld, who was an Austrian and US-American philosopher at the beginning of the last century. And it's an adaptation, how he has understood education in reflection to the change of society. So this understanding focus of an education for development and education for social change. And I was working a long time on the history of global education and global learning. And during this time, I realized how important is it to bring into the definition of global education the vision, where to go. And I was part of the group who was working on the Maastricht Declaration and the Maastricht definition in 2002 on global education in Europe. And since this time, I'm much more working myself with the understanding of the Maastricht Declaration, which is an education that opens people's eyes and minds to the realities of the world and awakens them to bring about a world of greater justice, equity, and human rights for all. So that is the definition I see as a basis of a lot of things where I'm working on. And by this, I understand global education as an umbrella term for very different concepts as citizenship education, education for sustainability, education for social change, human rights education, development education, and so on.
Right, right.
The second dimension of your question is what is global education in the sense, how is it done? So it's an empirical dimension of the question. And there I would like to underline that following the Maastricht understanding as well, there's a variety of understandings in Europe and in the world. And for me, it's always very interesting to ask people how they see this and to develop the local, how can I say, the local varieties and cultures in which global education is embedded. And we see linked to that very different forms of practice and of awareness. And in a very broad sense, you could summarize, or I would summarize, that global learning is a form of abstract social learning under the condition that social relations in an unsocial settings. So where people are not really having the possibility to communicate to each other, but they have to imagine the other as a partner. So that's in a nutshell how I would answer your first question.
Very interesting. And I think this well ties with my second question. And the question is, what knowledge and values are students expected to acquire through global citizenship and global education based on your experiences and the research work and the publications that you advanced in your very broad career?
Yeah, that's as well a question which is linked to two dimensions. The question of what concept do we have in mind and how would we imagine or how would we theoreticize the values and competences? And on the other hand, what competences do people have and what problems do we see when we talk about these different forms of competences or values achieved? Because we know that global learning, even done with the best ideas and the best values and the best concepts, does not always lead to best values and best practice and best acting in the world. So if we look in a more intensive way to the question what knowledge and values to acquire, I would first like to reflect what is a competence. The competence has very different aspects. A competence means cognitive skills and knowledge. A competence need attitudes and values. And these attitudes and values have to have a motivational side, a volitional side, so that you really want to achieve this, and social readiness, that you really do it, not only have the motivation and not only have the will, but that you really put it in place, and that this different forms then at the end lead to a successful action. That's how I understand, and this is in line with Weinert, Franz Weinert and others, how I understand competences. And if I then look to the competencies of global learning, and of course, this would then needed to be reflected in the skills and cognitive side and in the affect side and in the bringing something to action side, but it has a component of understanding complexity and understanding complex social relations and complex social systems. It would have a dimension of anticipation, so fantasy, and what does it mean if something is done and what are the long-term consequences. It has a normative component to say what life do we want to have together, and there for me social justice and respect is a very, very important dimension. It would have a strategy, or it does have a strategic component, how to bring into place, how to organize things, how to do social actions, how to work as an NGO, how to make project planning, all these strategic components. And it has a dimension of interpersonal and intercultural competence. So to deal with other persons in a respectful way. And these competences of global learning I was just elaborating are coming from a meta-analysis of Wisekomp and Redman, who analyzed more than 50 concepts of global education in the world and made a meta-analysis of the competences which are discussed. So, and I think that what is very important is to see that these competences are not always automatically there if you just do something in global education. And it needs a clear understanding, a very well reflection how, and evidence-based work, how should global education look like in order to lead into these competencies. Because we have, and we know a lot about very nicely motivated activities in the field of global education, which, however, do not lead to the values we want to have. However, they lead to paternalism, they lead to short-time solutions, and they lead to distance, to complexity.
Right, right. Which is very interesting. I think one of the values that you mentioned in relation to our discussion about global education, global citizenship, fostering global learning, is the notion of social justice, which is a theme that is quite popular among the several discussions and scholars that I welcome here to our interview series. And I want to link the theme of social justice to my next question to you, because preparing for this interview and reading several of your publications, I came across the notion of world society. And I think this is interesting, particularly when we discuss notions of social justice and how to educate the global citizen, global learning. So world society is a notion that kind of I like to develop with you in our conversation today. Can you elaborate on this? What type of world society do you foresee, for example?
Yeah, when I use in my work the term world society, I link this to the work of the sociologist Niklas Luhmann. And his understanding of society and world society is therefore so helpful in my views for education and for global education, because his perspective of world society is linked to the understanding of complexity and to this special form of complexity, which is linked to a more and more globalized world. Because he's saying that world society means that we always, when we speak about society, we link it in an implicit way to something which is outside, or which has a notion which is much more comprehensive than just the society in which the person who is speaking is just living. Because due to media, due to international discussion, due to migration, due to the consumer possibilities, you are always linked to the global world. And this global world is a world society. So then understanding of world society is not a normative one on saying this is the paradise of social justice. Right. However, it is an understanding which fosters and concentrates on the fact that locality is an empirical fact of the life today, and locality means to reflect deeply on abstract social rules about coexistence and living together at the one planet. So it is this term is focusing on the perspective that we need to have much more abstract social understanding, because the problem is not the problem, but the fact is that human beings are evolved with a very, very fine sense of sociality, but only of sociality for those they live with. And those which are not with us, it is very much more difficult to understand them in a socially way. So you can cheat somebody much more easier who is not there, who's absent, who is on the other side of the globe, than those with whom you live in a house or with whom you are connected in another way. And I use this term because it is very in an interesting way linked to my empirical research, because I did a series of empirical studies where we investigated what do students or people learn when they are in settings which are seen as settings for global learning, and how is the competence and the learning outcome linked to the didactical setting. And we saw in our findings that we can differ between 3 types of learning outcomes. And the interesting point is that from the perspective of an understanding of world society, we would only call one of the outcome as a wished global learning outcome. So what was the main finding? The main finding was that a part of the students or people involved in this learning learned that through global learning, that they add to their neighborhood another neighborhood. Mm. The second type was that people reflected in bigger communities and added to their community a bigger one. So they enlarged their understanding of community. And the third group was that they started to reflect the forms, rules, and the ways how people interact in a global way, and which rules are the foundation of living together. And in my understanding, this last group is the group which is really achieving competences in global learning, because this is the need for the understanding of acting with responsibility in a world society. And that, so therefore, for me, the term of a world society and the understanding of a world society is very important in a deeper reflection of the outcome and the competences which you want to achieve with global learning and global learning activities. And then we worked then back and reflecting what kind of didactical settings are needed for people in order to learn this, which kind of didactical settings and learning forms of learning are fostering this kind of global learning to deal and to work in and to understand the world society. And what I find very interesting is that participation is a very, very important issue, that high level and guided self-reflection and self-reflectivity. So self-reflectivity, which has a pedagogical background, which is guided and which is not only just yourself, but that you always critique yourself and get yourself in a bigger context, and self-efficacy, knowledge, of course, and a vision of how a world should look like. So I think that, just to summarize, the understanding of world society is a very important basic understanding of how global education is tailored.
Right. And this ties with our conclusion and last but core question of this dialogue together. And the question is, how would you define global education using 3 keywords, and why these 3 keywords? Challenging question.
Yeah, on the one hand side, a challenging question, but for me, it was, on the other hand, quite clear which words I would. However, it might be a little bit difficult to understand, because for one word, I use a word which is not which cannot be translated, which is only there in the German language.
Okay.
And this is Bildung.
Bildung, okay.
So Bildung, you might have heard about Bildung, and I shortly want to explain what it is. Of course, not in an easy way to translate. It would be translated into English by education and learning. However, what is the specific idea of Bildung is that if you say Bildung in difference to learning, you want to highlight the relation between self-reflection and self-relation and world relation. So if you speak about Bildung, it has always the two components that you relate yourself and to the world. And
Right.
I find this a very, very important notion to global learning, because global learning is, for me, always first a question of how do I see myself as a human, and how do I want to be, and what kind of social relations I do want to have, and then I need to have them as well to those who are absent and who are on the other side of the planet. So for me, it is about learning in self-reflection, and that is meant by Bildung, and that is the first word I would like, yes, to use. The second one is, as I was explaining, world society, or more easy, global intertwining, so that the local and the global are always seen in a relation linked to each other, so that from the local you see the global and the global the local, but that's much more intertwined, and this understanding of a world society, so that everybody and that the rules and the ways how we behave in a world have consequences for other peoples, even if we do not see them. That is, for me, a very important second understanding and notion. And the third one is justice, and coming with justice respect, because we will not, the most important, or the vision of global learning and global understanding of education for sustainability and all that, is that everybody of the globe, in the globe, or at the globe, I don't know what, has a possibility and the right to have a good life. Not only to have a life, but to have a good life. And it's not only humans. These are the species and others which live as well. And this form of an interplanetarian global justice, I see as another very, very important aspect of global learning. And so for me, Bildung, locality, world society, and justice are the three keywords of the concept.
Very interesting, very interesting. So this summarizes, in a way, our very important discussion around global education, global citizenship, global learning. I really thank you for joining this interview series. We had an opportunity to discuss with scholars worldwide, and you are a great addition to this ongoing conversation.
Thank you very much. It was, and it is, a really pleasure to talk with you and to contribute to this worldwide discourse, because I think that the topic is very, very important. And so I'm very happy that a lot of scholars are working on that, and that you, with your series of interviews, make visible this different voices working on the same or nearly the same interest and sorrows and hope.